Hey, my name's Shaun. I sell art on shanshan.co and screen reads on shanshanacting.com. Today we're going to review Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. So this is a movie by Destin Cretton. Our time is 2 hours, 12 minutes. A little long, but these big tentpole kind of Marvel movies are pretty long usually. And I think it's definitely okay. I don't think you could cut much fat out of the film to cut it down lower. You might be able to get to an hour 50 maybe. Stars are Simu as Shang-Chi, Tony Chiu-Wai Leung as Wenwu, Awkwafina Katy. Gotta love that name. She's Awkwafina. It's very smart branding. Meng-er Xialing, Fala Chen Li, Yeoh is Ying. So there's a story of this young man and his girlfriend or his friend, which they're supposed to be dating, but they're not dating, you don't know. And they're kind of car drivers, and then all of a sudden they get mysteriously attacked by this gang of assassins. They try to kill him, and they steal his amulet, and he's like, what's this? And he has a postcard, and he thinks it's from his sister, so he flies. He's like, I gotta go find my sister. They might be after her as well. So he goes to find his sister, and they kind of have this battle, and eventually they kind of team up, and they realize their father, who runs this crazy gang, world-penetrating gang, and he has this ruler of the Ten Rings power. He's obsessed with the lost dead mother, thinks he can find her in her village, and he thinks she's trapped there. And so they have to stop them at all costs and get their amulets back. So one of the analysis that's kind of quirky I just found out is Marvel lost the rights to Fu Manchu, who is the father figure in this movie. And so in the comics, they always kind of vaguely refer to him. They say the father, but they don't say his name, so it's kind of weird. So that's the real name of Shang-Chi's father, but they can't use it in the film. One of these stupid friggin', it's just one of those business things behind the scenes that impact the film. It's not a big thing, but it's just kind of dumb and regrettable. It's not the biggest mistake Marvel made. The biggest mistake Marvel made was when Stan Lee got started in Hollywood. They didn't have any footing at all. They're just comics, and people are like, why do you want to do comics and films? And no one had any idea of the potential. And as the CGI kind of caught up in the 90s, then Hollywood started listening and say, hey, maybe we can make some of these movies much better than before. But at that point, Stan Lee sold to Sony the rights to Spider-Man, and later, Disney got the rights to Marvel, and so Disney's kind of managing the whole franchise except for Spider-Man. So you have this stupid thing where Spider-Man's run by Sony, and he can't really interact with any of the Marvel characters like Avengers, which is totally dumb because Spider-Man was one of the crucial Avengers in all the comic books. So this stupid business decision, just to kind of break into Hollywood just as kind of, you keep all these great characters like Venom and Spider-Man, and they're all on one side with Sony, and then it doesn't make sense to have Venom separate from the rest of Marvel, but it is what it is, You don't need that many villains in a movie, so it's kind of okay, but then it's kind of a shame in a way because there was hundreds of stories written with Spider-Man and other Marvel characters. As far as this movie's concerned, a little bit wooden acting by some of the characters. They're always stoic, which is fine if you have a few stoic characters, but you kind of need people on the fence more. And it is an action film, and they are going to battle, so most people are going to be like battle-hardened, kind of stoic. But you need a little bit of variety in those kind of characters. The two that stuck out really well is Awkwafina. She's really great with an American accent. I think she is from America, but you can see the acting is way more solid than the Chinese acting, I would say. Not that the Chinese acting's bad, it's just stoic, and you need a little more range than just stoicism, especially for the love scenes and the mother scenes, and you're just kind of like, this a little bit wooden a little bit. But that's kind of the nature of the Chinese character. They never like to show emotion, so that's kind of a thing too. Like, how do you define emotion in a culture that's kind of holding back their emotions, right? I was surprised how much I connected with the movie. I didn't think I would connect as well with the silly, because I was kind of on the fence. Is this a propaganda film out of China influencing Marvel? But Marvel had originally done this in the 70s, kind of with the rise of Bruce Lee, the opening up of society to other characters outside of just the white characters in movies. And so they started having black characters, and they started to have Chinese characters like Bruce Lee. And so the character in this comic side, they also kind of expanded to more minorities groups, which was really cool. Like Black Panther is one good example. And Shang-Chi to represents Chinese Americans. But then it's kind of like, there's probably Chinese money in this. And so it's kind of like, what's the impact here? But again, it's kind of authentic. I think it's pretty authentic to the comic books. You got to have that Chinese culture, what they definitely do with great sets and costumes, I think. But yeah, I was surprised I was, attached to this more emotionally. But I think it's just where I'm at kind of relationship wise right now, so I just got a divorce, so it's kind of like, ugh, you know? So this kind of movie just kind of hits you a lot more than it would normally. I think one of the flaws in the film is you have this little relationship between Katy and Shaun. They're good friends, but they're not dating yet, and the mother's asking, why don't you get married? And then, so it's like, they probably are dating, but then they cut it back for maybe the Chinese market or the CCP, I don't know. And they just made it very, very conservative, where the characters are never going to kiss, they're never going to be obviously not going to be in the bedroom. But that really limits the evolution of the characters between Katy and Shaun. And at the end of the film, they probably should be kissing at the end of the film at a minimum. You know, you can cut out the bedroom scene if you want to keep a PG kind of more for kids. But I mean, they should at least be kissing. I mean, what's wrong with a kiss? And that would have been a much more evolution there of the character, I think, would have been more solid. So that was kind of a little bit of a miss, but probably influenced by CCP and selling it into China. Maybe that's very culturally no to do that, but it's just a kiss, right, guys? But India is the really quirky thing too. If you kiss an actress on film, it's like, no, she's a slut now. And you're like, she just kissed him. What are you talking about? You know. So some of these more conservative sexually cultures is very interesting how they react with how films are shot. There was a lot of detail in the dragon sequences with all the monsters fighting. Obviously, I think they could have added a little bit more, you know, distant shot, like far off shots and then glow into the details and then far off shot and then back, because you kind of get lost when they just kind of zoom in and you're following the dragons and then this is all you kind of see on the screen, right? You're like, what the hell's happening? So if you see a little bit more like this, where you see like kind of them flying through the scene, you kind of understand what's going on. Like if you look at Game of Thrones, I think Game of Thrones does a really good sequence with dragons. They might be really close like this, but then they have like, you know, you see the dragon flying up from the distance kind of coming up, and you need those establishing shots, I think, for the dragon scenes. They do have the establishing shots, but I think they could have kind of worked a little bit more in there. So you just get lost a little bit in CGI, I think. It's really funny because it pops up Ben Kingsley. I don't mention him in the actors, but he's in here as kind of a cameo character, but his character is really funny. Kind of plays the Joker of the team, so it's really fun. So between him and Awkwafina, I think they're the two characters outside of the rest of the people being stoic. So you're like, you can't have the whole team being stoic, right? You need a little bit more variety there. And just kind of like this good nature family film kind of thing, which is fine, but all the characters shouldn't be on the family value kind of, they shouldn't be aligned. They should be kind of off in some of that and then maybe come together at the end. But in the beginning, it should be a little bit more off. And they are off, but you know, the resentment from the sister to the brother isn't as strong as you'd think it would be. I guess they're just kind of stitching it together really quick with a lot of different sequences. So they probably had a lot of film. They maybe filmed like 6 hours and they boiled it down to 2 hours, 12 minutes. So maybe there's a little bit more to the story that they could have had there. I don't know. You probably could have cut back some of the fight scenes more and then had these relationships build out more. Maybe that would have been a better solution, I think. But if you go to a karate kind of film, you expect action, right? So, you know, for the Chinese audience, there's probably way more battle scenes than this and less, you know, on the acting side. So they probably cut it a little bit differently for China. And there was a scene where the mother gets killed off by this gang who's out for a blood vendetta against the father who ran in his gang before he kind of converts to his good guy with the mother. And I think if they had shown kind of the brutalness of the mother's death, that would have been really cemented Shang Li's character a lot more as far as him being a coward. The father as kind of, you know, throwing himself into, you know, into the business afterwards, it would have more cemented those two relationship evolution of characters a lot better if they had shown that kind of brutality against the mother, and then the son witnesses it and he's like, oh, and then the father just becomes like, oh, you know, diehard badass kind of like go and kill the whole world kind of thing. Another kind of thing they did kind of cheesy that I didn't like is in the beginning, Shang Li's a coward, and then later it turns out he really wasn't a coward. He was assassin. He just lied about it being a coward. So that was kind of lame because then it's like everyone's stoic again. You get back to this problem with everyone being a stoic versus some variation of the character. I think if he had been stuck to that story of being a coward and then, you know, in the end become this badass, it would have been more believable. But he's always been trained, so it's kind of like you're trained, you go to battle, and then you finish him off. You're like, there's not much excitement there. And so you have kind of that missing part of him being amateur and then not being an amateur. They show him training as a kid, which is good. I think the kid scenes are really good. Those are actually, those are more authentic than the adult scenes in a way. The adult is more wooden again, more stoic. I think it's just too many stoic characters, to be honest. If you had kind of a little more variety in the characters, a little more personality, you would have got that. I mean, that is kind of characteristics of how they shoot Chinese films, so it's kind of hard to do that, I guess. But if you look at Chinese soap operas, there's plenty of emotion there, I think. So, you know, it's not like you can't have it in there. Great sets. I think sets and costumes were really establishing the Chinese character of the culture. It's interesting to see how this does because a lot of it, probably, I would say 50 to 60% was with in Mandarin with English subtitles. So a lot of Americans don't like to watch subtitles. They won't even watch a film that's with too many subtitles. I don't mind because I grew up studying languages, and I just think it's no big deal. In the 70s, it was very, very common. But as you got into the 80s, 90s, 2000s, people started making less and less foreign language films, well, the more the case was foreign language films didn't make it into the US as much as prevalently in the independent films. And a lot of these mom and pop theaters died off, so you didn't have a lot of independent film. And American audiences, they just don't sell the independent films too often, which is a real shame because there's a lot of variety. And you can see why Tarantino became a great director is because he studied all these foreign films and he had access to it. And if they had that on normal cinemas, the general American population could be better educated and have a better understanding of other cultures, I think. And some cities have kind of like fine art independent movie theaters, but I find a lot of places don't. Like I'm in Fort Lauderdale, which is a pretty big city, but I don't really see too much independent film. The only thing I've seen is a Rocky Horror film playing, which is fine. Rocky Horror is Rocky Horror, but that's an American film again, so it's not really that independent. It's independent, but it's American independent, right? So you get back to the same problem I was talking about. But I think it's a really good, fun movie. Very entertaining. I think they could have just done a little more variety with the character types. If you want to subscribe, you can subscribe below. And I'll see you in the next movie review. Thanks for watching, guys.